Hello, friends. Last night I got to deal with a great fear of mine. And I'm speaking a little tongue-in-cheek there, but this definitely was a transformation and a shift for me, although a subtle one. And I thought I'd share that with you today because I think that it has a lesson for all of us. First, I have to give a little bit of backstory. If you've read Chasing Turkeys, you'll know that when I was 17, I went up to the Teaching Drum Wilderness School. And I had written the gentleman that owned that school. It was a new school. And I asked him if I could come and live in the woods for a year. He said no to that, but he did say yes to me being his apprentice. So I went up for 3 months and essentially lived in the woods. Now I have all kinds of stories from that time. It was a very growth-filled experience for me. But I also was just very idealistic at that time. Probably still am now. But when I got up there, one of the first things that I discovered was that the Thetamarack, the gentleman that owned the school, lived in a house. And to my idealistic 17-year-old self, this made no sense. It was horrible. Still, I decided to stay, but I was intent that I would not sleep inside at all during my stay there. Never would I be surrounded by the boxes of walls. Now, for a lot of the times, everybody was sleeping outside, but sometimes everybody would go back to the house and they'd all camp out on the floor. And I said, absolutely not. So I would sleep outside during those nights. And I understand why people would want to sleep inside because it is mosquito, I don't know what to call it, but the mosquitoes up there, I think anybody that's been up there would testify that the mosquitoes up there are beyond what most of us would consider to be levels of sanity. It's intense. So there's one night I remember that I failed and I went inside. And here's what happened. At that point in my stay, had basically become kind of a wild creature. Nothing in the woods scared me. I mean, if a bear would walk out of the woods, I was ready to either make friends and and wander around with it and look for grubs, or if I had to fight it, I would fight it with my teeth and my claws. But there was one creature in the woods that I wasn't expecting. And that night, everybody was sleeping in the house and I was sleeping outside. And I was curled up and just kind of drifting off. And then I heard chunkle, 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 chunkle coming through the brush. It was a loud sound, but not overly loud. It didn't seem like it was a large creature. I thought maybe a raccoon. So I got up and got ready to meet whatever it was going to be. And then out of the bushes and out of the darkness came a white stripe on a beautiful black coat. And it was, of course, a skunk. And upon seeing that skunk, I saw the one thing that I truly feared, which was getting sprayed by a skunk. And I fled inside. And I slept that night inside. My one night in out of those 3 months, much to my shame. Now, ever since then, you know, I've had a little, I'm not going to call it a fear exactly, because it's not that sensation that you feel when you fear something. If one walked into the camera right now, I would not be, but I would be, whoa, hi, because I don't want to be sprayed. And the reason I don't want to be sprayed is I love hanging out with my family, and I would be sleeping away from them and eating away from them and being basically ostracized because of my smell for who knows how long. Our dog was sprayed a month ago and he still has quite a scent to him. So there is this concern. I'm going to call it a low level fear that I have wrapped around this animal. And I didn't really realize the significance of it until last night when I was sleeping outside. And I heard a very slight noise and I looked over and there were two skunks not 10 feet from me. So just 2-3 meters away. And there they were. And I had a familiar feeling of, whoa, okay. I do not want to be sprayed. And that gave me the sensation of almost wanting to go inside because I knew that the skunks were in this area and were hanging out there. And it was likely that in my sleeping outside, the skunks were going to be around me probably all night. And I had a choice there. My choice was to just give in to this low-level fear and to abandon sleeping outside, or to go into some kind of acceptance of the experience I was having. And this is where all of this becomes really, really important. Because often when we think about dealing with fears that we have, we're thinking about acute fears, those big, powerful fears that we have of something that feels phobic, that feels paralyzing. But I'm going to say that in some cases, maybe those fears are more natural. You know, we have a fear of something barreling towards us, and that puts us into a fight or flight. And maybe, you know, arguably, I'd debate there's other better ways to deal with even that situation. But that fear often will rescue us from a situation like that. But these low-level fears that we hardly notice, these are the things that eat at us in a chronic way. And they probably are not something that we would have experienced living in the forest. Rather, these are fears, or a type of fear that has been developed by our culture. Where right now I can sit and I can have fears of nuclear war, I could have fears of COVID, I could have fears of economic collapse, I could have fears of AI. It goes on and on. And of course, we live in a culture that celebrates and feeds us those fears all the time. So what I experienced last night is that I was laying there and I was focused on, not even on the presence of the skunks, but on my mind's creation of a scenario of possibly getting sprayed. This overwhelmed my senses. We know that our thoughts and our ability to sense the world, these can't really happen at the same time. The bulk of our mind goes onto one thing or another. If I'm thinking and texting, someone can walk straight up into definitely in my peripheral, right here, and I may not even see them or notice them because all of my perception and focus is going into the thinking or the task at hand. So my task had become thinking about the skunks and what could happen if I got sprayed. I could have dwelled in that all night. So, okay, my first choice, to abandon it, the situation. My second choice, to dwell within that low-level chronic fear. And the third choice, which I'm happy to report that I made, was to just accept the situation that I was in. Because the reality is that skunks are pretty friendly and don't go out of their way to spray people. So I settled into that experience. I talked with the skunks a little bit. And what unfolded around me, because now my mind was freed of that low-level chronic fear, was the experience I was having, which was a bright moon in the sky. illuminating everything, which was a great, just a beautiful starscape up above me. Shooting stars going across the sky. At the same time that hundreds and hundreds of fireflies were pulsating around me. At the same time that there was a great horned owl, a little one, a juvenile, calling in the forest for its mother. At the same time that in the other valley over there was a barred owl, ooh, 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 calling. At the same time that I was surrounded by these incredible beings, these skunks, who were just rooting around in the ground, doing their own thing, basically ignoring me even when I spoke to them, and sat up and tried to engage with them. And beautiful creatures fully visible to me in the moonlight. An incredible experience, an incredible immersion with nature that could not have happened if my mind was focused on that low-level fear, that concern. And again, super subtle, my friends. I'm not talking about, what if I get sprayed? I'm talking about my mind just going, oh, this is cool, but gosh, if I get sprayed, this could be really bad. And you see, very, very different than that full immersion in the experience I was having. And the reason I'm talking about this is that for most of us, we have a fair amount of these low-level fears and anxieties that are going on. And because they're low-level, because they're very subtle, we don't tend to notice them in the way that we do an acute, powerful fear or anxiety. And we just accept them as a normal part of what it is to be a human being. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But the one thing that I do know is that in myself, these low-level chronic fears or anxieties are more powerful in shifting and shaping my life than big fears. And so these are definitely 100% worthy of my attention, of noticing where in my life I'm holding on to these things and seeing what they're holding me back from. For some of us, it might just be worry about finances, about how we're going to make ends meet. And that pulls us out of being able to be there with our family in the moment that we're in. And that worry, that anxiety, that low-level fearing something, it doesn't solve the problem. Even though in our mind it wants to say, no, Kenton, you've got to listen to this, because if you don't listen to this, this will be a problem. If we have concerns about our finances, we can sit down, figure out our strategy, then set that aside, and we don't have to worry about it anymore. The worry is something that does not help the situation. Solving it, applying our rational minds to it, and coming up with a solution, and then our solution may or may not work. That's going to be the fact with all solutions. But worrying about whether it will work doesn't do us any good. So for me, maybe it'll be helpful for you too. I'm going to be paying more attention to where I harbor any of these low-level fears or anxieties. Because last night I had a graphic example of how an almost humorous little low-level fear and anxiety, not anything that could actually do me harm, had a profound effect on my ability to experience a powerful, powerful moment in life, a beautiful moment in life. Where else is that happening inside of me? Where is that happening inside of you? And when we take that little low-level fear, and those work best when they're unexamined, and we take it out and we set it in front of us, and we say, are you really doing me any good by fearing you, by worrying about you? And then we say to ourselves, okay, I'm going to look at this solution. I'm going to make a decision about it, just a rational decision. For me, the rational decision was, if I get sprayed, I'm going to get sprayed. It's not the end of the world. Now, I can go about enjoying this experience. With the finances, I'm going to make a decision. At the end of the month, I will either have money to pay the bills or something will happen and I won't. That's probably what would have happened anyway, regardless of whether I worried about it. So taking these things out, and the real trick for me is to do that deliberately. To say to that worrying mind, okay, I hear you worrying about this. It's a very subtle thing, but I hear it. And now we're going to take this out and we're going to make a decision about it. A decision with a timeline. So for me, the timeline was, I'm just not going to worry ever again about being sprayed. If I get sprayed, I get sprayed. For the finances, I'm going to make my decision and then see what happens after the 31st of the month and not think about it until then. This tends to satisfy that fear part of our brain by giving it a clear plan. We've acknowledged it, we've brought clarity to it, now we can move on. Trying to just push aside those little fears, that doesn't tend to work because they're little nagging things that work on being under the radar. Probably if you're watching this channel, you're on a quest of mindfulness, you're developing more and more mindfulness every day. Here's something to turn your attention to, is any place you have those low-level chronic fears or anxieties, bring them out, give them a clear solution, timeline if that's applicable, and then you can let them go and see what that allows you to experience. If you have a story like mine that you would like to share it in the comments, where releasing a low-level fear brought you into a experience of life. If you have other ideas or techniques that you use to deal with those low-level, subtle, chronic fears and anxieties, share that in the comments. My friends, thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of my family's channel and my family's life. We are grateful. Can't wait to talk with you in the comments. Love to you all.